Hi everybody, Jameson Malgier with Another Level Inspections. I wanted to talk about the new home inspector regulation. I really want to quickly sum it up for you guys and then talk about it a little bit more detailed. And this is 760 CMR 74, Residential Home Inspection Waivers. And essentially, to give you a very quick overview, the purpose of this law is to stop people from waiving their home inspection. And so the way that it does that is with a couple basic components. And so the first one is, if you're selling a home, you cannot condition the acceptance on a waived home inspection. So you can't tell someone, if you want to buy this home, you have to waive your inspection. That's the first point. The second point is, if you are a seller, you are not allowed to accept an offer with a waived home inspection. So if a buyer comes to you and voluntarily waives their inspection, you have to reject it. You cannot accept that offer. And then there's a couple more points to it. So those are the first 2 points. The third one is, you have to, as either a seller's agent or a seller, you have to provide basically a document that sums this up. And that has to be provided to the buyer and the seller and signed off on so that everyone is aware of the regulation. The fourth part of this is that there's a provision to make sure that there's nothing done to render this meaningless. In other words, it kind of has a catch-all to anything that someone might do to get around this law is covered with a provision. And then the last part of it is basically talks about the penalties associated with it. So that's a quick overview of the law. And the thing that they're going to get in writing says, pursuant to 760 CMR 74, seller warrants and represents that the agreement to purchase is not, and in no event shall be, contingent upon waiver, limitation, or restriction of the buyer's choice to obtain a home inspection, in whole or in part, unless one of the exceptions under the regulation applies. The seller agrees and acknowledges that the buyer may choose to have the premises inspected by a licensed home inspector of the buyer's choice. The seller further agrees, warrants, and represents that if the buyer chooses to have a home inspection, the buyer shall have a reasonable period of time after the full execution of the first written contract as agreed by the seller and the buyer to decide whether or not to proceed with the transactions if the results of the inspection are not satisfactory to the buyer. So there's a few different parts to that. Home inspector has to be licensed. Home inspections cannot be limited or restricted. They have the choice to take a reasonable amount of time to consider whether they want to move forward with the property, and then they can decide. So home inspections moving forward is a right, and that's a fantastic thing. Just to go into a little bit more detail, the first section of the law talks about the purpose. It's intended to protect the health, safety, and welfare of home buyers and consumers. This is a consumer protection law. I've heard it called as a home inspector law. That's just not true. I do a lot of inspections after people waive their inspection, and I still get paid for that inspection. But guess what? We find significant issues with those properties. And who's stuck with those issues because they felt compelled to waive the inspection? The consumer. So this is a consumer protection law. It also has some definitions. It talks about a home inspection has to conform to RCMR. A home inspector has to be licensed. There's been a lot of these walk and talk inspections that are illegal and are in an hour, and there's no report performed. Those are not going to fly under this regulation. It also talks about the person being licensed. I've heard lots of people using contractors. A contractor is an unlicensed home inspector. That's really what it comes down to. And then it goes into more details about some of the other factors, like what rendering a home inspection meaningless means. And then it goes through the various exemptions, like if it's a spouse or a child, if it's a divorce, if it's before the start date, which we'll talk about, if it's a foreclosure, if it's like a refinance or a trust or a new construction with a warranty. There's various situations this does not apply. This does not go into effect per the new CMR until October 18th, 2025. So to recap, this is a great consumer protection law. It's going to help take home inspections off the table for negotiations, and consumers are now moving forward going to be making offers. The offer will get accepted without talk or consideration of the home inspection, and then they'll have a window to decide, okay, should I get one or not? And I get so much feedback from buyers that have waived their inspections. They all wish they could have had an inspection, So this is really going to protect a lot of people and be a really great thing. So at least if you're buying the biggest purchase of your life, you can be aware of what you're buying. And it's going to take a lot of these walkthrough inspections or ways around getting a home inspection off the table. A lot of this has been driven by pressure from the real estate community about, if you want to get this house, you have to waive your inspection. I've gotten that exact feedback from buyers. Even realtors that don't think you should waive an inspection, they're obviously going to inform their buyers, hey, there's probably 5 or 10 other people waiving their inspection. So even if the real estate agent is really trying to get them to get an inspection, it's still a problem. So this relieves that and protects the consumer. And I'm happy to talk more about this law in more detail, but this is just a quick overview so you can understand what's in the law, what it's about, and just getting a general idea so we can start talking about what it's going to look like in October when this goes into effect. Thank you.